How did we go from this
Weather season! Weather season! It's duck season, and I say fire!
to this?
Hey everybody, it's me, Mickey Mouse.
Here are 5 reasons I think there's been a downgrade in quality when it comes to animated cartoons since the beginning of the 3D animation era. Hi, I'm Jordan Needham and this is Jham 3D. If you're anything like me, you may have stumbled across a few cartoons or remakes these days. Oh god, the remakes. And just wondered,
What the fuck happened?
hey, like what happened? This used to be such a great cartoon and it's ruined. Why? So today, as a 3D artist, I'm gonna be talking about why I think 2D animation should be revived to a greater degree and why 3D animation contributed to kind of stripping away most of the magic in the cartoon industry. Hold on. Okay, now pump the brakes. I don't want anybody to get the wrong feeling, like I'm going after 3D animation as an art form itself. Of course not. I'm a 3D artist. I've done a fair share of 3D animating, and I love it. I look up to a lot of the animators that make incredible films like Incredibles, and I didn't even mean to do that. Pixar films, and Into the Spider-Verse and stuff like that. So this video is not to say that 3D animation itself is a horrible craft or that it's never good. No. In fact, I think 3D animation has brought us some of the greatest films of all time. Like Frozen and Inside Out, and like I mentioned, Into the Spider-Verse was a great combination of 3D and 2D. So this is not at all to say that 3D animation is the problem, but it is to say that I think 3D animation enabled a lot of shortcuts, which contributed to the downgrade in quality of a lot of cartoons these days. Now, perhaps I'm just biased and this is all rooted in nostalgia, but having watched a lot of classic Warner Brothers and Disney animated cartoons from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and in comparing it to what's shown to kids these days, even in the 2010s, I can't help but notice there's been an overall downgrade in quality, at least when it comes to entertainment, story arc, character development, and comedy. It's all just forgettable, I guess. Even 2D animated shows from like the end of the 2D era, like Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Test, and Ben 10 from just about 20 years ago. I'm 20 years old, turning 20 this month. Although those shows weren't a cultural phenomenon to the height of what Bugs Bunny was, or Mickey Mouse and Daffy Duck were all in the golden era of animation, I think those cartoons will go down as more memorable and iconic than Paw Patrol.
Ready, set, get wet! Fast!
So why did shows like Looney Tunes and Mickey Mouse, and Charlie Brown, and SpongeBob, and even adult shows like The Simpsons get worse as 3D animation became more prevalent? So number one, cash grabs. 2D animation is so impractical. It's way less efficient and it costs more money. So 3D is cheaper, quicker to do, and therefore requires less of a budget. 3D enables shortcuts that otherwise couldn't really be taken in 2D animation. Regardless, you have to draw every frame. And that doesn't mean it's gonna be good, but in 3D animation, a computer does a lot of the work for you, and it's faster, it's more efficient, it's quicker, it's cheaper. In fact, many people are unaware that the amazing film Snow White actually put Disney in $600,000 of debt because of the intense production it took to create it. And this also changed Disney's decisions moving forward. Walt Disney was not allowed to make as many decisions for budgetary reasons as he was before with the company, and the company moving forward applied budgets and deadlines more strictly to avoid going out of business. And that's why films like Bambi and Pinocchio, as great as they've aged today, I mean, some of the greatest films of all time, were actually considered somewhat of a letdown compared to its predecessor, Snow White, because they couldn't pour as much money and diligence into those films. Which to me is one of the most mind-blowing facts I've ever heard in my life for so many reasons, and I really encourage you to sit on that one and think about it for a second. Which leads me to the next point. 3D animation by default is a little too perfect. So what we're really hitting on here is imperfections. Because 2D animation is all done by hand and humans are imperfect, over time we end up having these little like misalignments and these little scribble marks or change of colors or whatever it is that adds up to make this really artistic, appealing feel to the animation. And appeal is of course one of the 12 principles of animation. Now it sounds kind of counterintuitive because you would think like, well, we want things to look perfect and 3D animation spits everything out to be perfect. And while cartoon animators absolutely reference how movement works in the real world, their job is actually to exaggerate it. The physics in 3D cartoons is often infamous for being so bland. And the reason behind this is because a lot of 3D software was created to simulate real-world physics. Well, physics have to be exaggerated in most animations. Otherwise, it's just boring. The whole thing doesn't feel like an art piece to a lot of people, and by default, the computer makes it way too grounded. And one of the 12 principles of animation is to exaggerate. I think a lot of that is lost when it comes to 3D because you don't have to draw every frame. You don't have to think about it every time. You walk from here to there. You know what? We're not going to edit the in-betweens because the computer did it for us. And unless the animators went out of their way to stretch and squatch, to exaggerate, to emphasize, then the computer does all the in-betweens. And in that, the playfulness of it all, the humor of it all, and honestly, the magic of it all is just lost. This brings me to reason number 3. They're not allowing the animation itself to do the majority of the storytelling. Here's a lesson from Chuck Jones, one of the most legendary animation directors of all time who worked on Looney Tunes and the most iconic versions of those characters.
It's helped to have the dialogue. The dialogue is not the thing that makes it work. The story should sell itself by the way it moves.
He talked about how when they were boarding the famous Warner Brothers shorts, What's Opera Doc and Duck Rabbit Duck, what you're trying to get to is where you can tell the story completely visual, and then the dialogue just acts as boosting up the character.
And I also think that it's harder for 3D animation to carry the entertainment for viewers because it's not as visually breathtaking anymore as 2D animation was. There's something about the intensity of making a 2D animation, drawing it frame by frame, that makes the art form itself really intriguing and more entertaining at times to the average viewer, I think. People nowadays know a lot of the work has been shifted to computers and feel less obligated to admire it. And yeah, of course, they're massively unaware of the challenges that 3D software brings itself, but it is what it is. Which, if you're a digital artist, this is very annoying because, oh, well, it's just a computer. I mean, anybody can do that these days. Oh, no, you know what? You're not a cartoon, but you sure are funny. You're hired. Yeah, it's your first day. Come on. We got some retopology to work on, some rotoscoping. Oh, and also, well, I'll just have you organize all the 500 clips that I forgot to label when I filmed B-roll. Whoops! I think there's something visually breathtaking about watching an entire film like Snow White. There's something about watching that and knowing that people went through that every single frame into 24 frames for every second of the runtime. Now, they might have done a lot of it on twos, I don't know. Every single frame in that movie was done by hand. That is incredible. It's breathtaking. And just by watching that, you're like, you can't believe it. But with 3D, I think a lot of that admiration is taken away. And that puts a lot more pressure and a lot more weight on the writing to be better. The character development, the story, everything there has to be probably even better than it was in 2D animation. I think you could take some of the best, most iconic Looney Tunes episodes and use the same exact story and put it into 3D, and I still think the 2D animated version would be better. I think this is just because people admire 2D animation a little bit more because of all the hard work and drawing effort that goes into it. It's pretty shocking. Another example of this would be Fantasia. Of course, a lot of people do like watching like trippy 3D animations, but would anybody watch like an hour of that, like a feature-length film of just 3D animations for an art form? Probably not. I don't think there would be the same interest in it, and I know that Fantasia was questionably accepted. While the film had its low points, it was all about showcasing the art form itself. And I'm not sure that a 3D animated version of something like Fantasia could come out today and generate the same sort of public appeal or public attention.
Characters that you animate should be somewhat pleasing to look at. They should have some kind of charismatic aspect to like about them.
For me, when it comes to cartoons, I think where the appeal really takes a hit with 3D animation is often with the toon shaders. A lot of times the weird 3D shading, although it might be accurate, is kind of taken away from the innocence of the characters and almost makes it look freaky, or like at times, if it's not handled correctly, just downright gross. You may have disagreed with those 3 points, but now we're gonna get into the final 2 categories, which I think are more objective.
One basket tool coming right up.
So these days, many cartoons are made strictly for children. And as an adult, if you ever do watch some of these modern day cartoons, they're almost like an insult to your intelligence rather than entertainment.
It's Rhino. Stealing ice cream on a hot day like this? We'll stop him.
And that's not to say that they shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be educational. It's just to say that at the very least, times have changed. Having read a book about Walt Disney and knowing the history of animation that I do know, you couldn't get away with this. You couldn't just make a film that parents were gonna pay to see in theaters. Like, it was more difficult to go see a film. You had to walk outside, you had to buy a ticket, you had to see it in theaters. You couldn't just, buy a CD or download the damn thing. So back in the day, shorts with Mickey Mouse had to be entertaining for adults and not just children. And assuming that cartoons are made strictly for children is actually just completely mistaken. Walt Disney knew this. He knew that it was supposed to bring their childhood imaginations to life. That's why adults could enjoy the films as well as their kids. And of course, children are easier to entertain. When you set out with a bar so low strictly just to entertain children, of course the quality of the film is gonna take a hit. Whereas if the story, like in Incredibles, left a mark on the adults as well, it would become something that's timeless and unforgettable. And this is certainly not the case anymore. But if you go back and watch Looney Tunes from the 80s and 70s, it's like genuinely hilarious. Like, it's still funny to this day. I'm somebody that's, 19 or 20, and I still find the humor in those shows really funny. Whereas if I watch kid shows today that are shown to like 8-year-olds or something, it's maybe a giggle here and there, but I'm not gonna like lose my mind laughing to it. So in addition to the film industry just growing overall and allowing for the space of there to be just shows made for children, we have the screens to entertain everyone in the family separately. So you don't have to entertain the adults as well as the kids, or the kids as well as the adults. You can make shows strictly for one or the other.
Quiet, I'm hunting rabbits.
And that also means that societal norms have changed a bit. A lot of the maybe political correctness of the old Looney Tunes shows, for example, haven't aged very well.
Kill the rabbit, kill the rabbit, kill the rabbit.
Those shows may or may not have been appropriate to show kids back in the day. It's fucking hilarious though.
Kill the rabbit?
And that's actually why a lot of Disney animators left Disney to go work at Warner Brothers, because Disney was like, this is not kid friendly and your humor is too dark or too edgy. It's gonna make parents upset. And a lot of animators didn't like that. So a few really significant animators left Disney to go work at Warner Brothers so that they could be a little bit more catered to adult humor. Continuing with a little bit of a history lesson here, it used to be the goal to make these characters like Mickey Mouse a household name. So the first, like Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Goofy, Daffy Duck, Scooby-Doo, those characters were all curated to be household names. Everybody in the country was supposed to know who they were, and even more so for Mickey Mouse. That was like symbolic of America at the time. But today it's exceptionally difficult to make any cartoon character nowadays be known by every American household. And now it does happen here and there with like the minions from Despicable Me, but I still don't think it's at the same degree of what Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse was. And now how does 3D play a role in this category? It's a little less direct. Again, it's just enabling shortcuts, and it allows for perhaps an oversaturation of animations these days. There's so many characters, so many films, and so many different projects going on, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. That's actually pretty cool. That for one, the industry isn't really focusing on making a character that's a household name. And then two, how are you gonna make a household name when there's so many characters? Like, as the average American back in the 30s, it's very easy to make Mickey Mouse a household name when all you had to do is know one animated character, because that's like one of the only really famous ones out there back then. Where nowadays it's like everybody knows Coke and Pepsi, right? They don't even have to research that. Does everybody know the characters from Inside Out? Probably not. As good as that movie is, not everybody knows the characters from them. But of course, Pixar has done this here and there with characters like Buzz Lightyear and Woody, but that goes into another point.
Buzz looking alien! Where? Ah!
Animation is no longer a revolution. 2D animation, 3D animation, animation as a whole is no longer revolutionary. And while there are some boundaries broken here and there, it's really just more the people involved in tech and film that understand those innovations. But the average person doesn't really see the progression in the animation and the technology to the same degree as they used to. My point is, I think animation has lost its wow factor in most cases for people nowadays. After the initial 3D Pixar films like Toy Story and Incredibles, it doesn't wow people the same way that it used to. It used to be like incredible that they were even able to produce a 3D animation, but now people have seen it enough times to know that it's possible and probably not as difficult as it once was. And like I was speaking about earlier, that kind of takes away from the admiration of it. Not completely, but to a degree, which is a sad and difficult reality for me to face as a 3D artist, because I think 3D animators should be respected to the same degree. It's a completely different art form, and the challenges that they have to jump through to create a film like Frozen on budget and on a deadline are not by any means easy, but the average person might see it closer to easy than 2D animation. And so for a lot of films and a lot of cartoons, they can't lean on that wow factor anymore. Now here and there are animated shows or animated films that absolutely have a wow factor.
Like, what's up, danger? Like, what's up, danger?
It's such a unique take on animation, mixing 3D and 2D animation, and also mixing in influences of comic book layout in a way that we've never really seen it done before. It's so unique that it absolutely has a wow factor. But for instance, Incredibles 2, it's a great movie. I absolutely love it. I watched it and I thought it was great. And the animation in that movie is actually better than the first one. But it isn't the same sort of cultural phenomenon where it's like, oh my God, everybody has to go see Incredibles 2 because this is like an innovation of humanity. We've never seen animation done like this before. Whereas Incredibles 1 was like, I can't believe Pixar was able to do this. Because there's been so many years since then, and animators have gotten so much better at what they do, so much quicker, and technology has progressed. It's not quite the same anymore. I don't think the general public goes to see an animated movie because it's gonna be next level animation. I think it's because it's a great film overall, but the amazing animation isn't necessarily what sold them to go watch it. In other words, it's been done so many times that the general public kind of takes it for granted now. So all things considered, I'm really just sad that 2D animation is no longer in the spotlight. And I'm absolutely not arguing against the existence of 3D animation. Again, I'm a 3D artist, of course I wouldn't do that. And I take so much inspiration from amazing 3D animations and the artists behind them, but rather I'm arguing for the restoration or preservation of 2D hand-drawn animations. And I think in large part, the film industry made a mistake almost entirely replacing 2D animation with 3D animation as if it was inherently better. In my opinion, they bring a certain type of magic that 3D animation typically can't, which is not to say that 3D animation can't be magical. Again, it's a different type of magic that 2D animation brings to the table. And that's why when films like Into the Spider-Verse use the magic of 3D animation and the magic of 2D animation all in one film, it's so amazing and breathtaking to see. When I was writing the script for this video, I talked to my friends about it, and I was worried that I would come off as like a boomer, bragging about how good the good old days were. And well, I think that is hilarious. I do think it is something that's relevant to address here. A person like that would be pinning all the downfalls that 3D animation has brought to the table strictly on tech. And I'm not doing that. Like, hell yes, let 2D animators draw on tablets, use iPads, use animation software to make the process more efficient and better. And I'm also not saying that the older the better, because Steamboat Willie, for example, is nowhere near as good as what 2D animators can spit out today. We know so much more because of those pitfalls. But I also don't think that the newer the tech, the better the animation, because it's not really the case. When 3D first started taking the world by storm, I think some people were starting to assume assume that, oh, well, it's 3D animation using computers, meaning that 2D animation using hand drawing is just more primitive and therefore it's worse. But I don't think that's the case. They're entirely different things. We need to stop seeing 3D as an evolution beyond 2D animation and see it as its own unique medium itself. 2D animation deserves its place in the industry. Comparing 3D animation to 2D animation isn't like comparing a modern day iPhone to a 90s cell phone, where one is inherently better than the other. It's kind of like comparing an acoustic guitar to an electric guitar and just saying, well, the electric guitar is better because it uses more tech. But there will always be a time and a place to use acoustic guitars. So comparing 3D animation to 2D animation in some ways is like comparing apples to oranges. Now, nostalgia can often be a mistake in human psychology, where we just assume that what we used to have was better than what we have today because it's just a good, I don't know, it's a typical human psychological mistake. While you could say that's absolutely what you're doing here, I disagree. You see, shows like Looney Tunes were out in the 70s and the 80s. Those were shows that my dad grew up on. But somehow I still preferred those to the reboots that were being shown to me on Cartoon Network. And they didn't even come out when I was growing up. They had been out for decades at that point, and I still thought they were better as a kid. That is partially why I focus so much on that era and not really the like Ben 10 early 2000s era, where I think the nostalgia bias could have played a larger role. But the fact that some of these shows that I'm highlighting were out 40 years ago, I'm 20. So yeah, I think you get the point. Okay, so it is impossible to mention every relevant point on this subject, but I hope at the very least that I built a strong case for the existence and revival of 2D animation in the animation industry. And if you work in the industry, I am more than welcome to hear from you. What did I get wrong? What do you think I missed? What do you think I should touch on in a future video? Now, if you like this video, I'd highly appreciate it if you hit that like and subscribe button so I can continue making content like this on this channel. I have a lot of plans for it and I can't wait to share it with you. Also, I'd love for you to share with me your favorite 2D and or 3D animations in the comments below. Particularly recent ones, like ones that came out in the modern day that you think maybe deserve more attention than they've gotten. I'm Jordan Needham, this is Jham 3D, and thank you guys so much for watching.